Imagine standing in the snow outside Moscow in December 1941. The temperature is far below zero. Engines refuse to start. Weapons jam. Soldiers who just months earlier marched across Europe with confidence are now digging frozen ground with bleeding hands. Just weeks ago, Germany looked unstoppable. Now, for the first time, that momentum is gone. And here's the question that changes everything. What if Germany had already lost the war the moment winter arrived? Welcome back to History Plus. Today we're exploring why Germany couldn't win after the winter of 1941. Not because they were immediately defeated. Not because their army collapsed overnight, but because something fundamental had shifted, in strategy, in resources, and in belief. If you enjoy clear, powerful storytelling about World War II, take a second right now to like this video and subscribe to History Plus. It really helps the channel grow, and it tells YouTube you want more deep history content like this. When Germany launched Operation Barbarossa in June 1941, the plan was simple in theory. Strike fast, destroy the Red Army near the border, capture key cities, force the Soviet government to collapse before winter. It was built on speed, shock, and surprise. And at first, it worked. Entire Soviet armies were surrounded. Hundreds of thousands of prisoners were taken. German forces advanced hundreds of miles in weeks. To many observers, it seemed like another quick victory. But the plan had a hidden weakness. It depended on time. Everything assumed the Soviet Union would break before the cold season arrived. German logistics were not prepared for a long war, deep inside Russian territory. Supplies moved mostly by rail, and Soviet rail lines used a different gauge. That meant tracks had to be rebuilt as the army moved forward. Fuel trucks struggled over muddy roads, spare parts were limited, and as distances increased, every mile stretched supply lines thinner. By autumn 1941, German forces were closing in on Moscow. The leadership believed one final push would end it. But the Soviet Union did not collapse. Instead, factories were relocated east of the Ural Mountains. Millions of civilians were mobilized. Fresh divisions from Siberia were brought west after intelligence suggested Japan would not attack from the east. The Red Army was battered, but it was not broken. Then winter came early and brutally. Temperatures dropped far below what German planners had prepared for. Soldiers lacked proper winter clothing. Lubricants and weapons froze. Vehicles stalled. Frostbite cases skyrocketed. This wasn't just discomfort. It was operational paralysis. Units that relied on mobility suddenly found themselves stuck in place. Offensive momentum slowed to a crawl. In December 1941, the Soviet counteroffensive began near Moscow. Fresh troops, adapted to winter warfare, attacked weakened German positions. For the first time in the war, large German formations were pushed back in sustained fighting. The myth of invincibility cracked. That psychological shift was enormous. Until then, German forces believed they could outmaneuver and outfight any opponent. Now they understood that the enemy could absorb punishment and strike back. But here's the key point. Germany was not defeated in winter 1941. It still held vast territories. Its army remained powerful. The Luftwaffe still controlled much of the sky. So why say Germany couldn't win after that winter? Because the nature of the war had changed. The German strategy depended on short campaigns. Blitzkrieg was designed to destroy enemies quickly and avoid a drawn-out conflict of resources. After winter 1941, the war in the East became exactly what Germany could not afford: a long war of attrition. The Soviet Union had enormous manpower reserves. It had vast territory to trade for time. And most importantly, its industrial production was increasing, not decreasing. At the same time, Germany's economy was not fully mobilized for total war. Civilian production continued at levels that assumed shorter conflicts. Strategic planning underestimated how many tanks, trucks, and aircraft would be needed year after year. Every loss on the Eastern Front now had to be replaced in a prolonged struggle, and replacement became harder with each passing month. Another major shift happened in December 1941 that is often overlooked in isolation but devastating in combination. The United States entered the war after the attack on Pearl Harbor. When Germany declared war on the United States, it added the world's largest industrial economy to its list of enemies. That meant Germany was now facing not just the Soviet Union, but also the combined industrial power of America and the British Empire. Even if Germany achieved local victories in the East, it was now trapped in a global war against opponents, with superior long-term resources. On History Plus, we often focus on turning points that are not obvious explosions or dramatic speeches. Winter 1941 was one of those moments. It did not end the war, but it locked Germany into a strategic situation it could not escape. The quick victory plan had failed. The war would be long. And in a long war, numbers matter, production matters, fuel matters, replacement soldiers matter. After winter 1941, Germany faced three growing problems at once. First, the Red Army was learning. It adapted tactics, improved coordination, and expanded production of tanks like the T-34, which proved highly effective. Second, Germany's supply lines were overstretched across vast distances with poor infrastructure. Third, new enemies with enormous industrial capacity were now fully engaged. The psychological impact inside the German command was also significant. Hitler increasingly interfered with military decisions, refusing withdrawals and insisting on holding ground at all costs. Some of these decisions prevented immediate collapse. Others led to encirclements and heavy losses. Flexibility decreased, strategic debate narrowed, confidence turned into stubbornness. All of this meant that after winter 1941, Germany was no longer fighting the war it had planned. It was fighting a war it was not built to sustain. As we continue in the next part, we'll look deeper at the economic imbalance that grew after 1941 and how industrial production, manpower, and fuel shortages slowly turned the tide against Germany, even before the most famous battles like Stalingrad began. After the winter of 1941, the battlefield did not immediately collapse for Germany. In fact, during 1942, German forces still launched major offensives, but beneath the surface, the balance of power was shifting in ways that numbers clearly revealed. The Soviet Union was rebuilding at an astonishing speed. Entire factories had been dismantled and moved east beyond the reach of German bombers. Within months, production lines were running again. Tanks, artillery, and aircraft were rolling out in growing numbers. The T-34 became a symbol of resilience, not because it was perfect, but because it could be produced efficiently and in large quantities. Quantity began to compete with quality. At the same time, the United States entered the war fully. American industry expanded rapidly, producing trucks, aircraft, fuel, and raw materials, not only for its own forces but also through Lend-Lease aid to the Soviet Union and Britain. This meant Germany was now facing a coalition whose combined industrial output far exceeded its own. Even if German soldiers performed well tactically, they were slowly being outproduced. Germany, by contrast, had not prepared for a prolonged industrial war in 1941. Its economy shifted more seriously toward total war only later, and by then it was reacting instead of leading. Oil became a constant concern. Rubber was scarce. Replacement. Parts were delayed. Every lost tank, every downed aircraft, every experienced soldier was harder to replace. On the Eastern Front, distance continued to punish German logistics. Supplies had to travel hundreds of miles over damaged railways and muddy roads. When offensives resumed in 1942 toward the south and the oil fields of the Caucasus, they stretched supply lines even further. The deeper the advance, the thinner the support behind it. Here on History Plus, the key idea is simple but powerful. Wars are not won only by winning battles. They are won by sustaining effort over time. After winter 1941, Germany could still win engagements. It could still take territory, but it could no longer control the long-term balance of production, manpower, and fuel. By mid-1942, Germany made a critical decision that revealed how desperate the strategic situation had become. Instead of focusing on a single clear objective, the leadership split its forces in the south. One group pushed toward the oil fields of the Caucasus, another moved toward Stalingrad. The goal was ambitious: secure fuel supplies and cut Soviet transport routes along the Volga. But splitting strength across vast distances created vulnerability. Oil was now the center of everything. German mechanized warfare depended on fuel. Tanks, trucks, aircraft, all required steady supply. Without oil, mobility collapsed. The push toward the Caucasus was not just strategic ambition, it was economic survival. But the deeper German forces advanced, the longer and more fragile. Their supply lines became. Every mile increased exposure. Then came Stalingrad. What began as a strategic move turned into a brutal urban battle. Street by street, building by building, the fighting consumed men and ammunition at terrifying rates. Instead of maneuver warfare, Germany was trapped in attrition, the very type of conflict it could not afford. Meanwhile, the Red Army prepared a counteroffensive against the weaker Axis forces guarding the flanks. When the Soviet encirclement closed in late 1942, an entire German army was trapped. The Sixth Army's destruction was not just a battlefield defeat. It was confirmation that the strategic imbalance that began in winter 1941 had now matured into crisis. Germany no longer had the reserves, the fuel, or the flexibility to absorb such losses easily. On History Plus, we emphasize that Stalingrad did not create Germany's problems. It exposed them. The seeds were planted the moment the quick victory strategy failed in 1941. By the time Stalingrad ended, the question was no longer whether Germany could win decisively, but how long it could delay defeat. After Stalingrad, the direction of the war was no longer uncertain. Germany could still fight. It could still defend. It could even launch limited counterattacks. But the possibility of total victory in the East was fading fast. The Soviet Union was now advancing with growing confidence. Its armies were larger, better coordinated, and constantly supplied by expanding industry. German forces, on the other hand, were reacting instead of shaping events. Fuel shortages limited movement. Air power was stretched thin. Experienced officers and soldiers were irreplaceable. Every defensive line that broke could not be restored to its former strength. At the same time, pressure increased from the West. Allied bombing campaigns intensified. Resources had to be diverted to defend German cities and factories. When the Western Allies landed in 1944, Germany was forced to fight a full two-front ground war while still locked in massive battles in the East. The strategic trap that began forming in winter 1941 had now fully closed. This is why many historians argue that Germany could not win after winter 1941, not because defeat was immediate, but because the conditions for victory no longer existed. The war had become one of industrial capacity, manpower reserves, fuel access, and long-term endurance. In each of those categories, Germany was outmatched. Here on History Plus, the lesson is clear. Wars are not decided only by bold offensives or dramatic battles. They are decided by sustainability. After 1941, Germany was fighting a war it did not have the economic depth or strategic flexibility to win. From that point forward, every victory was temporary, and every setback was permanent. If you've made it this far, share your thoughts below. Do you believe winter 1941 was the true point of no return? Or could Germany still have changed its fate? And if you found this breakdown valuable, consider sharing it with someone who loves World War II history. Your engagement helps. History Plus continue bringing powerful, clear storytelling about the moments that shaped our world.